Imagine being trapped in a small, oppressive space, surrounded by the raw power of 6 fierce bulls, each one growling, snorting, and ready to charge. This was no ordinary punishment. It was a cruel form of control orchestrated by a baron who believed he could break a man's spirit. But what if I told you that instead of breaking, this man did the unimaginable? He walked away, not with nothing, but with all 20 bulls following him. How did he do it? And what does this story reveal about the limits of human resilience? Buckle up, because you're about to witness a tale of defiance, strategy, and sheer willpower that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power and submission. Before we dive deeper, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this incredible story with your friends. You won't want to miss what comes next. Chapter 1. The Baron's Power Play. In the shadow of towering walls and ancient castles, there lived a baron whose reputation was built on cruelty, a man who wielded power with the precision of a blade. His estate was vast, his word law, and anyone under his rule was expected to bend to his will. But none more than the slaves. To him, they were nothing more than tools, expendable and easily replaced. Among the many slaves he commanded, one stood out. This man wasn't like the others. He wasn't quick to bow or meek in spirit, and that, to the baron, was a problem. For years this slave had caught the baron's eye, not because of his disobedience, but because of his quiet strength. His demeanor spoke volumes, defiant but composed. This would not be tolerated. So the baron devised a plan, a punishment so severe, so humiliating, it would crush any last ounce of resistance. 6 powerful bulls, each bred for aggression and strength, were to be his tool of control. The slave would be locked in a small, barren pen, surrounded by these beasts. The message was clear: break him, or watch him break under the weight of fear and pain. But as the baron sealed the gate and stood back, waiting for his lesson to unfold, something unexpected happened. The slave didn't cower, he didn't run. He stood tall, his eyes never leaving the bulls. It was as though the power the baron so carefully crafted began to shift ever so slightly. The stage was set for something incredible. But what would unfold in the coming moments was beyond even the baron's imagination. Chapter 2. The Slave's Dilemma. The slave stood in the center of the pen, the 6 bulls surrounding him, like towering mountains of muscle and fury. Each one snorted and pawed at the dirt, their eyes locked on him, with a dangerous, wild intelligence. There was no escape, no possible way out. Every step he took, every breath he drew, was under the watchful gaze of the baron and his guards. Yet, instead of fear, the slave felt something deeper, an intense clarity. He had seen death many times at the hands of both man and beast. Yet, this felt different. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about outsmarting the very system that had imprisoned him. The baron's cruel design was not just a punishment. It was a test of his will, his intellect, and his ability to turn the tables when it seemed like all hope was lost. But how? The bulls were savage, their strength unmatched. They were the baron's ultimate weapon, bred for battle, trained to strike without hesitation. And yet, in the chaos of the moment, the slave noticed something small, but significant. Despite their raw power, the bulls were still animals. Animals that could be influenced. It wasn't enough to simply survive. The key, he realized, was to master the same subtle forces that controlled the Baron himself. He couldn't escape the pen, but maybe, just maybe, he could make the bulls work for him. The thought was ludicrous, yet the longer he stood there, the clearer it became. If he could make them follow him, could he turn the Baron's plan into his own victory? It was a gamble, but he had nothing left to lose. Chapter 3. The Bulls, Symbols of Control. To the Baron, the 6 bulls weren't just animals, they were symbols. Symbols of his unchallenged dominion over the land and its people. Each bull was a weapon in his arsenal, fierce and untamable. They were the epitome of power, brutality, and force. He had chosen them carefully, each one a testament to his ability to control the world around him. And now, they were his way of breaking the slave's spirit. But the slave, standing there amidst these beasts, began to see the bulls not as instruments of punishment, but as something else entirely. They were more than just beasts of burden or threats to his life. They represented a deeper kind of power. The bulls were driven by instincts, not malice. And with instincts, there was room for influence. It wasn't that the bulls were mindless, far from it, but their behavior was dictated by rules of dominance, respect, and territory. The slave could almost sense this unspoken order, like an invisible thread that tied the bulls to the world around them. This was the key. The same rules that governed the bulls' actions could be used against them. Instead of submitting to the violence that was expected, the slave could leverage his own understanding of these primal creatures. The bulls were fierce, yes, but they weren't invincible. Like the Baron, they could be manipulated, redirected, and even controlled if the right moves were made. As he slowly moved, observing each bull's body language, he began to formulate a plan. What if he could break their natural instincts without breaking his own? What if he could redirect their aggression and turn it against the very man who sought to dominate him? It was a risky thought, but it was the only chance he had. Chapter 4. The Unlikely Strategy. The slave's plan was simple, almost absurd in its audacity, but it was his only choice. He couldn't fight the bulls with brute strength. He didn't have that luxury. What he could do, however, was something the Baron never considered. He could outwit them. He began with small, calculated movements. He observed the bulls, noting their responses to his every gesture. One bull, a massive creature with eyes like molten iron, seemed to respond to proximity. It didn't attack. It merely watched, waiting for an opening. Another bull pawed at the ground, displaying its agitation, but it hesitated when the slave made himself appear taller by raising his arms. The strategy was working. It wasn't just about evading them. It was about manipulating their natural instincts. The slave began to move more deliberately, forcing the bulls to follow his motions. He would step forward slowly, and when the bulls shifted in his direction, he would stop. He wasn't running. He was guiding them. The key was in the rhythm, slow, controlled, deliberate. His next step was even more unexpected. Instead of retreating into the corner of the pen, where the bulls would easily corner him, he moved toward the center of their territory. In the animal kingdom, control of the center was often a sign of dominance, and the bulls were reacting to his shift. With each step, the slave was no longer merely avoiding attack. He was claiming space. By the time the Baron and his guards started to notice, the bulls were already moving in response to the slave's actions. It was as if he was no longer the one being controlled. Instead, he was the one pulling the strings, and the bulls, his unlikely allies, were beginning to follow his lead. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was the beginning of something much bigger. Chapter 5. The moment of confrontation. The tension in the pen was thick, so thick it was almost tangible. The slave had now established a delicate rhythm with the bulls, moving through the center of their territory with an air of quiet defiance. But the moment of truth was fast approaching. The Baron, sensing the shift in control, was growing impatient. His eyes narrowed from the edge of the pen, his grip tightening around the reins of his power. He had expected the slave to break by now, but instead, something entirely unexpected was unfolding before his eyes. The slave, knowing this was the moment, made his next move. He didn't rush. There was no panic, no frantic movement. Instead, he calmly stepped forward, closer to the largest bull, the one with the fiery eyes. It snorted loudly, shaking its massive head. The guards stiffened, ready to intervene at any second. The Baron's lips curled into a smirk. "He's finished," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But the slave didn't flinch. He extended his arms slowly, inching closer to the bull, his hand open but steady. The bull, sensing no fear, responded. It took a step back. The guards looked on, confused. The slave wasn't running, wasn't cowering. He was leading? In a moment that felt suspended in time, the slave made a quiet command. The bulls, those savage, aggressive beasts, shifted. They followed him, not aggressively, but with a calm obedience that sent a ripple through the watching crowd. The man who had been locked in a pen of fear was now moving toward the exit. With the bulls behind him, he walked calmly out of the pen. It was as if the bulls, these primal creatures, had accepted him as their leader. For a moment, even the Baron seemed to hesitate. Could this really be happening? Chapter 6. The Unexpected Ally. As the slave walked toward the gate, flanked by the 6 powerful bulls, the silence was deafening. The guards, stunned by what they were witnessing, made no move to stop him. The Baron stood frozen at the edge of the pen, his face a mixture of disbelief and growing rage. But what happened next was the last thing anyone could have predicted. From the shadows, another figure emerged. A tall man, his features obscured by a hooded cloak, stepped forward with surprising calm. His presence seemed to command the attention of everyone in the vicinity. The guards tensed, ready to take action, but something about this stranger made them pause. The slave didn't flinch at the appearance of the mysterious figure. Instead, he nodded almost imperceptibly, as if recognizing him. The stranger walked slowly toward the slave, who was still surrounded by the bulls, their heads lowered in a quiet, almost reverent way. The strange man's eyes met the Baron's, and for a brief moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Then, the stranger turned to the slave and spoke in a low, steady voice. "It's time. You've done what no one else could. They will follow you now, but you must lead them." The Slav nodded, his eyes gleaming with something more than defiance. It was determination, a quiet understanding that this moment, this escape, was more than just a physical victory. It was a psychological one as well. The bulls weren't just following him, they were with him. The stranger wasn't just an ally, he was a symbol of something greater, an affirmation of the slave's unbroken spirit. The Baron's grip on the situation was slipping, and he knew it. The game had changed, and in that moment, he realized something crucial. He had underestimated the power of his own system. The slave wasn't just breaking free, he was breaking the very rules that had once kept him bound. Chapter 7. The first signs of defiance. As the slave and the mysterious ally began to move, the tension in the air grew even thicker. It was as though the very earth beneath their feet was holding its breath. The bulls, once the terrifying enforcers of the Baron's will, now followed their new leader with quiet determination. The guards were frozen in place, their eyes darting from the slave to the Baron, who was too stunned to act. But this wasn't just an escape. The slave's movements had changed. He had stopped being the hunted and had become the hunter. Each step he took towards the exit was one of quiet rebellion, of deliberate power. He wasn't running, he wasn't cowering. He was asserting his own authority over the very creatures that were meant to break him. And the bulls, they walked alongside him, no longer symbols of the Baron's strength, but of the slave's resilience. The Baron's anger was palpable now. "Stop him! Don't let him get away!" he shouted to his guards, his voice cracking with fury, but no one moved. The authority that had once been unquestioned was now hanging by a thread. The slave had exposed a truth that the Baron couldn't deny. Power isn't just about force, it's about control. And in this moment, the slave had seized control. As they reached the gate, the slave turned to face the Baron, his eyes burning with a fire that the Baron had never seen before. "You never understood," the slave said quietly, his voice carrying in the silence. "You thought you controlled me, but it was never about you. It was always about the bulls, and how you failed to see their true nature." For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. The Baron's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and then the gate creaked open. Chapter 8. Testing boundaries. The moment the gate swung open, a wave of freedom rushed over the slave like a tidal wave. But it wasn't just the open space that made him feel liberated. It was the realization that the real test was only just beginning. The Baron's world had been built on dominance, and every move the slave made was an act of defiance. But now, in the quiet of his escape, he had to confront a new challenge, the world beyond the pen. As he moved through the estate, the weight of his decision began to settle in. The bulls walked alongside him like silent sentinels, their massive bodies moving with a grace that contradicted their size. They weren't just following him, they were with him, as if they had chosen him as their leader. But could he keep this control? Could he continue to assert his dominance over the bulls and prevent them from slipping back into their primal chaos? The slave had learned quickly that these bulls weren't just mindless beasts. They had their own hierarchy, their own rules. To lead them, he had to continually reinforce his role as their alpha, their guide. With each step, he tested the boundaries of his control. Every gesture, every movement had to be precise. A misstep, a moment of hesitation, and the bulls could easily turn on him. But as he walked, the slave found something unexpected: confidence. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. The world outside the Baron's estate was unfamiliar, but the rules were the same. It was about control, respect, and understanding the forces at play. And for the first time in his life, the slave realized he wasn't bound by anyone's rules but his own. The Baron had underestimated him. But the real question now was, could the slave outsmart the world that had always sought to crush him? Chapter 9. The Great Escape. As the slave and the bulls moved further from the Baron's estate, the weight of the moment finally hit him. They were free, truly free. The once oppressive walls of the Baron's fortress were now distant memories, barely visible against the horizon. The slave had done what no one thought possible. He had walked out with the bulls that were supposed to break him. But what he had achieved wasn't just physical freedom. It was a mental one, too. He had defied the odds and turned the tables in a way no one could have predicted. Yet, the journey wasn't over. Outside the estate, the world felt bigger, more uncertain. The slave knew that the Baron's reach didn't end at the gates of his property. He could send men after them. He could send even more powerful forces. But the slave had one thing on his side, something the Baron had never accounted for: his ability to adapt, to understand the world around him. And now, with the bulls at his side, he had allies who respected him. He wasn't alone. As they moved deeper into unfamiliar territory, the slave became keenly aware of how the bulls responded to his presence. He wasn't just controlling them. They were offering their support, their obedience, even their protection. Each bull seemed to understand their new role in this unspoken alliance. They weren't simply tools to be commanded. They were companions in a fight for survival, in a world that had always tried to break him. The slave was now the one who held the power. The thought was both humbling and empowering. As they disappeared into the vast wilderness, one thing became clear: the Baron's game was over. The slave had rewritten the rules. Chapter 10. What this story teaches us. The story of the slave and the 6 bulls is more than just a tale of physical escape or sheer luck. It's a story that cuts to the heart of human resilience and the power of defiance. At its core, it's a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, it's not the size of the chains that matter, but the strength of the spirit that breaks them. The Baron's belief in power through control was his downfall. He relied on force, on intimidation, and on fear to break the will of those beneath him. But in his arrogance, he failed to see what the slave had long understood. True power lies in understanding the forces around you, in shaping the game, rather than simply playing by its rules. The slave didn't have the strength to overpower the bulls. What he had was the ability to outthink his captor. He saw the bulls not as mindless beasts, but as creatures with their own instincts he could influence. His escape was not the result of brute force, but of strategy, patience, and an understanding of his environment. This story teaches us that resilience is not just about enduring suffering or pushing through hardship. It's about recognizing the hidden strengths around us and using them to create opportunities in the most unlikely of places. The slave wasn't just fighting for freedom. He was fighting to redefine what power truly meant. And in the end, he didn't just escape the Baron's pen. He walked away with something far more valuable: his autonomy, his dignity, and a lesson that the Baron would never forget. So, what does this story tell us? It's simple. No matter how oppressive the forces against you may seem, you always have the power to change the game. It's all about how you choose to play it.